Good evening. Tonight I will be discussing one of the most powerful but lesser known deities within the Indian tradition, and that is Uchchhishta Ganapati. Now, Uchchhishta Ganapati is one of the 32 forms of Ganapati, Lord Ganesha or Ganesh. Now, if you're not familiar with Ganapati, he is the elephant-headed deity with the big belly in Hinduism, in the Indian tradition within Tantra. And he is one of the most widely worshipped deities within the Indian tradition. Ganapati is extremely important in the pantheon. And before we discuss the specifics of Uchchhishta Ganapati, it's important to understand why Ganapati in general is regarded so highly in India. So, Ganapati is the son of Shiva and Parvati, or Shiva and Shakti. And there is a myth regarding how Ganapati gained his elephant head, because originally Ganapati had the head of a man. And he was, in this myth, charged by his mother, Parvati, to protect their dwelling. Now, at this time, Shiva had gone out into the wilderness, as he is prone to do, and was gone for a very long time. During that time, his son very diligently protected his mother, Parvati. But when Shiva returned, he returned in the state of wilderness. So you would associate this form of Shiva with Bhairava, or Bhairav. And this form of Shiva is the ferocious, animalistic Shiva. He is the integration of the divine feminine with the intense divine masculine that Shiva represents. And so you could see him as sort of like the inverse, the flip side of Shiva. Now, in this animalistic lycanthropic state, when Shiva returns to his home and he's met by his son is now blocking the entrance and he's doing what his mother told him to do. So he's very stubborn about it. He's very willful. That's important to understand whenever you're thinking about the nature of Ganapati. He's extremely willful. He will not allow his father to pass. For one, he's been told not to allow anyone to pass, but he doesn't recognize his father. Like I said, Shiva has been in the wilderness. He has taken on the essence of the jungle. And so when he returns in this fearful presentation, this incredible, awe-inspiring form. And so his son says, no, you can't come in. Well, what does Shiva do? He's in a lycanthropic state, very animalistic. He cuts off his son's head. Well, that obviously upsets Parvati quite a bit. And so magic is conducted, and Ganapati has a new head. He has the head of an elephant now. Ganapati, if you are to place him on the spectrum of consciousness within Tantra, he would rest at the Anahata. Okay, so you have Shakti at the foundation in the Muladhara, you have Shiva at the crown, and then in the center you have Ganapati. There's also a relationship between Ganapati and the Manipura, a very close relationship between Ganapati and the Manipura, which is represented in his big belly. He is a consumer. He eats a lot of prana, and it accumulates in his gut, in the Manipura, the jeweled city. There's an interesting phenomenon that occurs with agoris that are practicing very intense bhakti with Ganapati or very intense rajas yoga. So rajas is the guna that we associate with the Manipura and we associate with the Anahata. When agoris are practicing this very intense rajas yoga, they will oftentimes develop a large belly. And you've probably seen examples of this. I myself have experienced the expansive aspects of rajas yoga. I've had students who have had this experience as well. One particular student, I won't mention their name, but they actually experienced overnight a shift into a very large extended belly and then a retraction once the rajas yoga was completed. So this is something that we would associate with Ganapati, as well as other deities that have a strong Manipura aspect, like Budai. Budai is the laughing Buddha. He's the chubby, jolly, fat Buddha that goes from place to place, laughing in the face of suffering. He has a very large belly. And what is accumulated in the belly? Well, we have an accumulation of prana. As I said, prana is distributed at the Manipura. So all of this energy that is being taken in is directed into the gut. It accumulates, then it expands out to all other parts of the body, as well as can be expressed outward through apana. So this is what is occurring with Ganapati. He is accumulating a very large amount of prana in his belly. He's holding on to it, and he does expel that prana, and he distributes it, but he has such an abundance of energy that he's got the big belly, the big, jolly belly. We would also associate with Santa Claus, another figure that has a deep heart connection, a deep connection to the jovial nature, the joy that we would associate with the Anahata, with the Rajas. So that is a very important thing to understand when we're discussing any of the 32 forms of Ganapati. Because Ganapati always has some element of this heart expression and very intense accumulation of prana. We have, as I said, Shakti at the root, Shiva at the crown, and in the center, their child, who is a representation of the union of the divine feminine and divine masculine. We have in the center Ganapati at the Shatkon. I've actually seen some tantric art, very beautiful art, that depicts the face of Shiva and the face of Shakti, and they come together, and in the center, their combined faces create the image of Ganapati. And that's what is being represented, the coming together, the creative force, the development of child, and the childlike nature of the heart, the joyous nature of the heart. These are things that are critical to understanding the nature of Ganapati. Now, of all 32 forms of Ganapati, perhaps the most potent and most dangerous to work with is Uchchhishta Ganapati, sometimes referred to as the Agori Ganapati or the black elephant. Sometimes he's depicted as black, sometimes dark blue in complexion. But his nature is this. He is Lord of poison. And he is also Lord of the Vama Marga, or Vamashara, which is the left-hand path. As Lord of the left-hand path, Uchchhishta Ganapati is the culmination of all of the work that is conducted in Dakshinashara in order to access what is left over. Uchchhishta is a word that means leftover. Leftover. Okay. Now, there's a lot of significance to this. We're going to come back to that word, uchchhishta, many times. Leftover. One of the meanings of uchchhishta is that when you reach transcendence in Dakshinashara, there are aspects of your consciousness that are burned away. They are released. You have a release of attachment. The aspect that is left over once this process is completed, that is the Uchchhishta, the leftover self. So Uchchhishta Ganapati is the child of the unification of Shiva and Shakti in a transcendent experience, taking the form of Lord of the left hand. He is the Atman that is left over once everything else is released. He is the anchor that is established and realized in the form of Vamashara after the completion of Ascending Yoga. So as you're practicing Ascending Yoga, with my students, they begin in the Muladhara and they practice until their consciousness reaches a point where there's a natural progression to the Svadhisthana, and then we practice specific forms of yoga nidra to move to the Svadhisthana, Manipura, on up until you reach the Sahasrara. And when you reach that point, the goal is to induce ego death. So this is carrying Shakti to Shiva. Throughout this entire process, the Anahata is attached to Guna. And so there is great potential that rests inside of the Anahata. It is generating over time. It's growing stronger. You have all of this potential that's developing, all of this power that may be expressed, but it is stifled by attachment. And the true power that is expressed whenever you're able to fully access the Anahata from a Vamashara perspective is the self, specifically the Uchchhishta self, the leftover self is that element that the leftover self is that element that allows you to establish a foundation for indulgence over compulsion. And the individuals who are in full practice of Vamashara are those who are able to reach that state of release from attachment, and all of that power in the Anahata that is bound to the Rajas Guna is released. And now, whenever you access the Anahata, instead of being influenced by very intense expressions of ego, there is a new development of personality. Personality is key here. So in this new development of personality, the yogin can express an individuated consciousness that is not limited to the Anahata's pure energy of electricity, the Rajas nature that we would associate with the Anahata prior to releasing Guna. So, what does this mean? It means that the Anahata being the seat of will, remember I said Ganapati is very willful. The Anahata being the seat of will becomes the foundation for a new practice. When you're practicing in Dakshinashara, you start at the Muladhara, you advance to the Sahasrara. When you practice in Vamashara, you start in the Anahata, and then you expand out from there, and whatever balance is formed as part of that process of integrating all of the various aspects of the self, that becomes the Atman. That becomes the self that is embraced as individuated personality. This is different from the goal of a pure Dakshinasara path, which is to dissolve into oneness. All right? And when I say dissolve into oneness, I'm not saying that in terms of it's wrong, it's bad to dissolve into oneness. For some, that is the dharmic path that they are advancing towards, and is correct for them. For others, however, dissolution into oneness is not the path of Dharma. There is a new path of Dharma where the Atman is recognized as individuated personality, as opposed to the Atman of the ultimate or higher self. These are words that you hear a lot in the New Age. The ultimate or higher self, which is, generally speaking, associated with that point of oneness, that point of dissolution. So, when we are practicing yoga, if we are bringing our awareness towards the left hand, if that is our ultimate goal, then we are trying to reach the state of Uchchhishta. We are trying to preserve the leftover elements of the self. That leftover element is the soul, okay? It's the soul free from attachment. Attachment is what is burned away. So what is left over after attachment? That is the soul expression. Okay? And it can change over time. So you begin with this new life. You are second born once you complete this initiation. And in this second born state, you now have the will to indulge, to choose what aspects of consciousness you want to integrate. And in that process, you begin to practice Vamashara. The only way for most people, of course, there's always an exception to the rule, but the only way for most people to access full realization of the self is to enter into a heterodox path. So Vamashara is a heterodox path. That means that this is the opposite of the orthodoxy. So that means that the methods that are applied are highly individuated. Okay, there's experimentation. There is not a strict reliance to a moralistic dogma that you would often find in Dakshinashara. Because the idea with Dakshinashara is that I will not partake in alcohol. I will not smoke cigarettes. I will not have sex. I will not engage in any sort of physical violence. I will be very ascetic in my practices. And that can bring you to the place of ego death. And for some people, self-realization does lead to that kind of life. But for others, there is a need to integrate poison. See, because many people have a dharma that is tied up in poison that they cannot access, because when they touch that poison, it immediately becomes a compulsion and it destroys them. For example, alcohol. There are many people, whenever they touch alcohol, they become alcoholics. It might be some aspect of their dharma to engage with that poison. This is just one example. It might be some aspect of their dharma to engage with that poison, and maybe realization of the self and attainment of happiness or satisfaction and power would mean being able to consume alcohol. But they can't do it until they have released themselves from the aspect of attachment that prevents them from transforming that particular poison into medicine. This is where Uchchhishta Ganapati comes in. Because Uchchhishta Ganapati is the ultimate poison eater. He is the leftover Lord. Okay? Here's another reason why we use the word Uchchhishta, leftover, to describe many deities, not just Ganapati, not just Uchchhishta Ganapati, but many deities within Vamashara. Many Vamashara deities, excuse me, are worshipped through puja, where you give leftover food. So if you're practicing within Sattvic Hinduism, which would be like Orthodox Hinduism. When you go to the temple, you are going to it in a clean state. Okay. Particularly, there's an emphasis on cleaning the mouth. The mouth is a portal to the mind, associated with the Vishuddhi. So the implication is that you need a clear mind, you need a clean mind, you need a clean lifestyle, you need to wear clean clothes, brush your teeth, wash your mouth before you go to the temple. And when you go to the temple and you're in this clean state, you're ready to receive the nature of those sattvic deities. Sattva, not necessarily in terms of the Vishuddhi and the Ajna, but sattva in terms of, as I said, orthodox, clean, mainstream society. Before I continue with this point, I'm just going to talk about the aspect of the leftovers and the dirty water as part of the left hand. I got a good question here. Someone asked, I missed the part about second-born, so I must die to be reborn. A literal death or only through an initiation, excuse me. So, specifically what I was talking about during that section of the lecture was death and rebirth through initiation. So a living death. To experience a living death. And that is what we call the clear light experience, or the ego death, or reaching a level of samadhi where you have released attachment to the self, to the individuated self, and you're in communion with the higher self, as is sometimes, or oneness, the monistic point. Now, typically, that's achieved through initiation, like Dakshinashara. Dakshinashara is the classic tantric initiation for going from a foundation in the material body up to release in the spirit. But I will say that we recognize within Tantra the potential for many births and many lives. And so there can be a physical death that leads to a rebirth, which is an alteration of consciousness that allows for a second birth, or to reach a level of awareness of the self that allows you to escape attachment. If you die in deep attachment and you have not completed such an initiation, that's not the end necessarily of your journey, of the journey of your consciousness. It can go on into other births. And Draco Fire also asked, they said they wanted to learn about the difference between Abrahamic burial and Aryan cremation. That's a very good question. I will actually cover that in a full lecture, but just to quickly give a response to your question, within the Abrahamic system, the idea is that the physical body is held to house a soul again in the New Jerusalem. That's in the Christian tradition, specifically. But within Aryanism, the material body is, first off, it's considered to contain prana that needs to be expelled in apana after death. So the individual isn't really considered fully dead until all of that prana is expelled. So in traditional Aryan cremation, you are trying to speed up the process of the release of that prana as quickly as you can, which includes burning the body. And there are many rites that are conducted over the body as part of that process. The smoke is it's the carrying of the physical into the spirit. So in the Aryan tradition, we regard the physical body as being very sacred, being just as important as any other aspect of consciousness. So it really is part of a process of carrying it with us, carrying the physical prana that we have accumulated in all of its forms, in our hair, in our flesh and bone, as much as we can send into the spirit, we want to send it. So it's the same as when you burn incense over your food and you're saying prayers into the smoke. Smoke is the means of transferring these elements into the next world. Okay, so let me return to what I was speaking on just a moment ago, which was the difference between the cleanliness, the sattva in initiation and going into the temple and receiving the essence of the deity, and what we find in Vamashara. Vamashara is quite different. In Vamashara, the idea is that you are releasing yourself from dogma, you're releasing yourself from the orthodox practice as much as possible, and in doing so, you're able to gain access to other elements of the self that might not otherwise be entertained. In doing this, you are exposing yourself to things that now, as a result of your second birth and your ability to release yourself from attachment, you can now indulge in these things. So, Vama, in Vamashara, sometimes is translated to female or woman, and there's a strong sexual component to Vamashara. Oftentimes, male yogins who are practicing Vamashara will engage in tantric sex with a consort. This is a big taboo within Dakshinashara and within mainstream Hinduism. Within most religious practices, ritualistic sex is a big taboo. You're dealing with a very intense poison. Women are a material manifestation of Shakti, and in the Kali Yuga, Shakti is the Lord of the world. And the things that are poisonous to us are closer to the material world. So the closer we get to Shakti, the more likely it is that we can be overtaken by that materiality. So when you are engaging with the feminine principle in a ritualistic practice, you can become possessed by it very quickly. Many people do. And so it's important that when you're engaging in something like tantric sex, you're doing so from a position of indulgence and not compulsion. This is where many practitioners of the left hand get caught up. They get caught up in other things too, like drugs. Aleister Crowley, for example, was not very good at protecting himself from spiritual influence, because whenever he would engage with the poison of hard drugs, he would be overtaken by it very quickly. And there's many examples of this. But some practitioners of the left hand can engage with these things. And when they're engaging with these things, they are taking on, at the foundation, the essence of Uchchhishta Ganapati. Uchchhishta Ganapati is a figure who accepts all things as puja. All things. So, literally anything. No matter how sick, disgusting, disturbing it may be, you can give this as an offering to Uchchhishta Ganapati and he will accept it. Now, this is dangerous, very dangerous. Like I said, Uchchhishta Ganapati is one of the most dangerous deities that you can work with, because whatever you put into the black elephant, it will come back to you in a very distilled, willful form. That can look like many things, because there's a processing that occurs. Okay? This goes back to the Manipura, Rajas element of Ganapati, that distended belly, big belly, holding all this prana. This is a place where things are processed, poisons are processed, right, and distributed. So, in some ways, giving to Ganapati can be a purifying process, because you're giving him your fears, you're giving him things that are afflicting you, You're facing those things directly, and you're seeing how they measure up in your consciousness, in your Atman. Because, like I said, when we're dealing with something like the Anahata, in a Vamashara perspective, we're dealing with the foundation of personality. And that can mean that you're integrating things from the Vishuddhi, from the Sahasrara, from Manipura, from Muladhara, whatever. They can all come together. Someone could be operating from a foundational Vamashara work in the Anahata, but have a very, very heavy, almost entirely Muladhara essence to their personality. And that is just how things have developed in that specific person. So when you're operating from a foundation in the Anahata on the left hand, does not mean that you're going to be filled with the essence of the Anahata, which is that electricity that I'd spoken about before. So, Ganapati is a place, Uchchhishta Ganapati is a place of processing poison. Okay? So, some of the work that I've done with Uchchhishta Ganapati, that some of my students have done with Uchchhishta Ganapati, includes feeding into Uchchhishta Ganapati elements of the self that may seem poisonous, but there is a wish to transform that poisonous element into something that is medicinal. Okay? For example, most of my life, I had a severe dairy allergy, which is funny because I'm always promoting the Aryan tradition, and I couldn't drink milk. And it would get very bad. It was very, not just lactose intolerance, but actual allergy. It made me very ill to consume any amount of milk, whether it's cooked into something or just drinking it. I could not have it. So I set out, actually last year, I set out to do some very intense bhakti work with Uchchhishta Ganapati in order to overcome this allergy. And after some really intense work, I was able to do it. I no longer have that allergy. I can eat whatever I want. I can drink tons of milk. It doesn't affect me anymore. That is the kind of siddhi that you can gain from working with Uchchhishta Ganapati. You are able to take something that was poisonous to you and turn it into medicine, which is what I did with the milk. Now, like I said, this is a very challenging thing because Uchchhishta Ganapati is like a wild beast. Okay? There's a very intense, willful, wrathful presence that comes with Uchchhishta Ganapati. He's extremely selfish. He is a lord of the left hand. So when you're working with him, you have to understand that he's going to try to take from you. He's going to try to push you over, establish his order. And so when you're interacting with him, you can go mad very easily. You can lose yourself. In pursuit of the self, you can lose the self. That is one of the dissolving aspects of the Anahata. To become so consumed with your own self-development, with accumulation of your own power, that you lose yourself. You lose your ability to relate to others, and in losing your ability to relate to others, you cannot even see yourself anymore. And that is something that can happen in working with Uchchhishta Ganapati, as well as just losing yourself to wrathfulness. I've seen some people working with Uchchhishta Ganapati that have entered into very intense wrathful states. And many tantrics will warn you of going into puja with Uchchhishta Ganapati because of that threat. But if you want a very fast and powerful means of gaining power, you can contact Uchchhishta Ganapati directly. You can work with him directly. He is Lord of the left hand. So anyone who practices Vamashara does touch upon the essence of Uchchhishta Ganapati to some degree. He is Lord of the left hand. But when you work with him directly, bhakti with Uchchhishta Ganapati directly, this is very intense work. Before I get to this next part, another question: where can one get a modern cremation as per Aryan traditions? Sadhguru, actually, one of the great things that he's working on right now is he is training people in how to conduct traditional Aryan burials, not burials, but cremations. So funerary rites. So yeah, if you're interested in that, look into the work that Sadhguru is doing. Currently, he's operating he's operating all over the world, but he has a large operation in the United States, and that's where a lot of this training is occurring. So if you're interested in learning how to conduct an Aryan cremation, that's a great place to go. I have been studying Aryan funeral rites for quite some time, and at some point I will likely give a lecture on that subject, and I will publish some materials on how you can actually conduct these rituals. But yeah, in the meantime, I would recommend looking into the work that Sadhguru is doing. Okay. Another aspect of Uchchhishta Ganapati that is important to understand. So you have with Ganapati the child of Shiva and Shakti. But with Uchchhishta Ganapati, there is a dark element. And we actually would associate Uchchhishta Ganapati with the black sun. He is a black sun figure. He is perhaps the most potent black sun figure within the Indian tradition. He is eclipsing the sun. Okay? There's many aspects of important yoga to understand in regards to this. So, when you are practicing Dakshinashara and you're trying to overcome the ego, there is an eclipsing that occurs. It is the eclipse of the ego. It is the killing off of the old order so that something new can be developed in the ashes. And that is one element of the Black Sun. The Black Sun cult is about establishing a new order of self-determination, indulgence, a master morality, after you have completed this initiatory process. You have the rising of the lunar aspect, the feminine principle, the rising of the lunar aspect, the eclipsing of the sun, or the masculine principle, the old masculine order, and the establishment of a new order. And that new order is the child, the black sun. And this is Uchchhishta Ganapati. He is the destruction of the old order and the establishment of something new that is based upon the principles of Satan and Vamashara, the new black order. And that is what we gain from working with Uchchhishta Ganapati. We can take on the essence of the black sun. Now, of course, this is, yet again, a very dangerous thing, because you are accumulating an intense amount of prana within your body, something that is almost nuclear in its energy. You're generating like a nuclear power plant within yourself. It is extremely poisonous. There is a radiation element. I've had students who have had visions of radiation, Ganapati and radiation, when they're working with Uchchhishta Ganapati. There seems to be some potential link there with radiation. And it makes sense because if you think about a nuclear power plant, you have this very intense heat developing. And if it's not kept in check, everything melts down, everything can be destroyed. If it's kept in check, you have this very intense source of power and energy that you can draw from over time. But if you allow it to overtake its boundaries, overtake its useful boundaries or its useful condition, then you have a meltdown and you have a disaster. So this is one aspect of Uchchhishta Ganapati. That's part of the danger, is that you have this very intense accumulation of poison. Now, if that poison that is accumulated deep in the gut where we experience the inner fire, if that poison is released outside of proper control, outside of proper indulgence, then it can become extremely destructive. So you have to be careful with that. Yes, you can eat a lot of poison when you're working with Uchchhishta Ganapati if you have the aptitude, if you have the proper training, if you have the proper guidance. You can eat a lot of poison. that poison is not always helpful. That poison is not always medicinal. Sometimes poison is just poison. Sometimes medicine becomes poison. But you have to understand where you're at in relation to that thing. And when you get the momentum going of working with a figure like Uchchhishta Ganapati, the tendency is to eat more and more and more, consume more poison. It's gluttonous. That's the aspect of gluttony that we associate with the Manipura. And then it becomes wrathful. You're willing to do whatever it takes to get the poison, to drink it, drink that black water. And that's the wrathful energy of the Anahata. So this in combination is extremely dangerous, extremely dangerous. Now, if that wasn't dangerous enough, Uchchhishta Ganapati has a consort. Uchchhishta Ganapati's consort is Matangi. Matangi, one of the Mahavidyas. She is associated with the outskirts, with leftovers, with the mind, with the darker aspects of the mind, with total free expression of the mind. So that means a complete release of dogma, a complete release of the taboo and the way that you interact with the conceptual realm. So with Uchchhishta Ganapati, there is more of an emphasis on material poisons for most people, because that is the age that we are living in. We are living in the age of plural, in the age of material poison. But with Matangi, his consort, the emphasis is on the conceptual poison. So the scary ideas, the broken mind, the trip that's gone a little too far. And like most deities, when you're working with one deity, there is a potential for the consort to come along and show his or her face. And this has occurred many times in my practice and in the practice of others that I've observed, I've guided. Matangi tends to follow Uchchhishta Ganapati. Uchchhishta Ganapati tends to closely follow Matangi. They're kind of like a natural-born killers couple. They're very dangerous, and they hit different points. So with Uchchhishta Ganapati, there's a tendency towards a physical terror, being faced with immediate physical danger. And with Matangi, there's a tendency towards psychic terror. And if you combine them together, it's just pure terror. And that terror is a test. If you can advance beyond that terror, if you can work with those entities directly, especially if you can do it in their divine union form, then you can gain access to incredible levels of freedom in expressing the self, both within the physical and the conceptual realm. However, and this has to be taken very seriously, you should never attempt to work with Uchchhishta Ganapati or Matangi or both in divine union until you have reached a point of self-control, of transcendence that allows you to have that experience. Because I'm telling you from my own experience, even if you've been practicing tantric yoga for many years, even if you have a high degree of skill, knowledge in that area, and you have reached the conclusion of Dakshinashara initiation, you can still be very easily taken in by those forces, and they can do very intense damage. So, this is not to say that we should fear and shy away from those practices, but we just have to go about them in a way that is beneficial to us, because we're working with a high level of tamas guna, or aspects of the material world, the gross expression of consciousness when we're practicing Vamishara. So when you are in the presence of this, you need to know that the physical construct of reality will play a much more important role in your practice. as compared to when you're working with something that is of a very intensely spiritual or sattvic nature. So with all that in mind, I encourage you to learn more about these gods, understand them, observe their iconography, but respect them. And if you can respect them and approach them properly, then they can give you great power. Thank you all very much for attending. For my private instruction students, we are going to have our Q&A on the Discord. Everyone, have a good evening.